This is Sanctity of Life Sunday for us. You know, George Bush, President George Bush W., of course, when he got into office, one of the things that he wanted to change was the direction that America was going, because with Bill Clinton, of course, there was many things about the pro-life movement that got backburnered. Matter of fact, my generation, baby boomer generation, brought you a lot of bad things. And probably the worst of all is legalized abortions in America. And before I get started, I've got a couple of disclaimers. First of all, as a baby boomer, several years ago, I decided that I needed to be an educator and a speaker on the subject of pro-life, and an advocate, and sometimes a troublemaker. And here's one of the things that I've learned. I've learned that women who are my age and childbearing age, from 1973 forward, approximately 38 to 39% have been involved in an abortion. So what that means is anytime you get up to speak about it, you stand a pretty good chance that somebody in the room has been a victim of this from that side. And so that's when I say I deliver this with a broken heart and not in any kind of judgment of that. As a matter of fact, when I worked for over 20 years with a pregnancy center, one of the greatest things I got to do is every 6 weeks they would have a graduation for those who had been in a post-abortive care class. And I'd be in there with several women and some men, and we would have a dedication time, and they would leave that time. And I think it's important to express to you, because a lot of us don't even understand. Many of you are thinking, you know, what happens to a baby? I love our Catholic friends because they're very strong on this. As a matter of fact, had it not been for the Catholic dioceses across this country, we would be even in a worse situation. But if you are Catholic, or if you understand what they believe that when the baby is aborted, it is an annihilation of a soul. So for that reason, they are very strong in the pro-life movement. Now, I believe that the Bible teaches and clearly teaches that the baby that is aborted goes directly to heaven. Now you might ask where I got that. I got it from over in 2 Samuel. There's a story about King David. King David had been with Bathsheba. They had made a child, and he had killed a best friend and was trying to hide what had happened, and then his sin was found out, and in that particular story the baby falls ill. And while the baby is ill, the king goes into his quarters and he won't eat and he won't sleep, and as a matter of fact he won't even get into bed. He lays on the floor and he weeps and he weeps, and then one day he hears his servants outside the door whispering, and they're whispering about the death of the child, and they are afraid to tell him because they think if they tell him he will take his own life. And he opens the door and says, "Has the child died?" And they said yes. And once they say yes, he bathes himself, he puts on his kingly garments, and he goes and he eats, and then he goes and worships the Lord. And his servants are so shocked, they stop and they say, how is it that before the baby died you seemed so depressed, and now you seem to be the king again? And he says this, and this is the basis for what we know. He said, "I cannot bring the baby back to me, but one day I will go where he is, and we will be reunited." So if you've been in the vortex of that yourself, one day you will be reunited with that child. And that's the hope we have. But I'm sorry for what my generation did. Really, I look back and I try to figure out what it is that my generation added to America. And basically, I've come up with some killer guitar, rock and roll guitar players, a couple of amazing drummers, and other than that, not much. Everything else was negative. Everything else we did has put a blight on America. You go all the way from the sexual revolution to AIDS, to all the things, and to legalized abortion. So today I want to really teach you about what it means, and what it means to America, and what it means to us, and what should be our response. I actually have a PowerPoint. Now, if you don't write well, I got some over here. You can pick them up. All these notes are over here if you want them. But I want to begin by saying, why is abortion such a line in the sand for the Christian? Why do we stand and say, no, this can't be. We must stop this. Why can't we be left alone to make our own choice? I wanted to preach this last week, but I didn't want to preach it coming off of the Women's March, because if you saw anything about the Women's March, the #1 sign said what? Well, don't say what all the signs said, because many of them were vile. And I was offended that many children were carrying signs that were vile. But one of the main signs you saw, one of the things that came up in every speech was, I have a right to my own body, pro-choice. Pro-choice. Now, when I'm on an airplane or somewhere and somebody brings up the idea of abortion, I always say, yeah, I'm pro-choice. And they go, you are? Yeah. How can you be a pastor and be pro-choice? I mean, that's even what the pro-choice person would ask. And I said, well, I'm pro-choice. I'm for the kid. I think the kid gets to choose whether he comes or not. Not the mother, not the father, not some doctor. Let the kid choose. And after he gets here and grows a little while, ask him if he's happy to be here. You know, and I don't get caught up in the argument of when does life begin or all that other stuff, because I know when life begins. It begins in eternity past. It begins in the heart and the mind of God before we were ever created, before there ever was earth, when it was void and had no form. God knew exactly what he was going to do. He knew every hair on your head. He knew every day of your life. He knew in advance, in eternity past, who we are, when we would come, how long we would last, and what our lives would look like, because he's God. And back there, all those decisions were made, and it is not man's responsibility to change them one iota. So, the second thing I would tell you is this. There are 5 warning signs, and these warning signs indicate that a nation is absolutely in decline. And the warning signs are this: the devaluation of the family. Now, does abortion devalue a family? Absolutely. The second thing that we look for is sexual freedom. And sexual freedom really started in the Roaring 20s, but when we got to the 60s, my generation perfected it. And so we look at our nation now, and we think sexual freedom is a bigger deal than marriage itself. And all the verbiage that you hear today is more about your sexual freedom, and your sexual freedom in America is more important than religious freedom. And that's how far we have sank as a country. The third thing is the disintegration of marriage, and certainly we have seen that. It's been legislated. It's been the not-so-Supreme Court has not just ruled on a law, but they've made another law. That's one of the problems with legalized abortion. They didn't rule on it, they created it. And so you see that is happening in America. And then violence in the streets. And we're seeing more and more and more violence in the streets. And it's not all terrorism. Much of it is just the disenchantment of parts of America. And then the final one that you look for in a nation that is destroying itself is the disregard for life. And since 1973, America has disregarded life at an unprecedented amount. Frightening to even look at the numbers. To show you the enormity of the problem, the total population of America today is, you can see it, it's just over 311 million people in America. The numbers that we know have been aborted since 1973 are over 64,000. Or I'm sorry, 64 million. And that 64 million does not represent, some states don't report how many abortions they have. Two of the most interesting states that don't report it are the two states that have more abortion than any other states. That would be California and New York. So without California and New York reporting, we have somewhere beyond 64 million lives that have been lost. By the way, when you begin to think about that many people that have been lost, and you look at all the things that are going on, even today, the DACA stuff and all that you see, let me express to you, if we had 64 million Americans that should have been a part of this world, and they were here today, there would be a workforce that wouldn't allow anybody to come across a border. You wouldn't need a wall. The jobs would be taken. By the way, we wouldn't be trillions and trillions of dollars in debt because those Americans would be paying taxes. This is the idiocy of this law. This is what scares me to death about America, is that our leaders cannot understand that they created an economic problem, they created a social problem, and they created a moral problem, all with one illegal law. One swoop. And now we are facing the consequences of the decision that they made. So you see that the enormity of the problem, the number of abortions, and when we look at the equivalent of losing the state of California and Texas, that puts it in perspective for you. When you're trying to figure out how many is 64 million people, just imagine a tsunami hitting California, and California, everyone in California would be gone. And a tornado hitting all of Texas, and all of Texas being gone. The entire population of both those states will put it in some kind of perspective for you to understand the enormity of the problem. In September, in September 11, 2001, you might have woken up to that scene. I remember waking up and turning on the Today Show, and one of the buildings was burning, and while watching Today Show, I watched the other airplane fly into the second tower. And I was in shock. You know, none of us knew what to do, none of us knew what this was. And we began to figure it out, and then we found in Pennsylvania another one headed toward the Pentagon, hits the ground, and we lost over 3,000 Americans that morning. And America did something that only America could do. Boy, we got ourselves together, and we knew who the enemy was, and we began to go directly after the enemy. And that was a right and righteous thing to do. But on a more benign battlefield, that same day, and every day since, and every day before, since 1973, we lose about the same amount to abortion. We legally lose over 3,000 Americans every day. And we don't mobilize ourselves and run after the enemy. Why? Because we are the enemy. I have faced my enemy in the mirror, and it is me. Every day. Just imagine, every day is like 9/11 in your mind and in your heart. And if it's not, it needs to be. You need to wake up every morning as a Christian and be insulted and shocked that your country can legally do what it's doing day after day after day. That's why you ought to be in the fight. That's why we ought to be an advocate for this. Do you realize that after George Bush, and he came in and he put in really about 130 different things that made it easy for pregnancy centers to exist and for the pro-life to move forward. And then we got another regime move in, and the Obama and the Democrats moved in, and the first rule of business, he did away with everything related to pro-life that Bush had put into place. He took his pen and got rid of every one of them. And to date, President Obama is the only person, the only president to ever stand in front of Planned Parenthood and promise them they will have government money from now on. He's the only one to ever speak there. And if you think Planned Parenthood is a nice organization that just takes care of people and has good things that they do, and they have some good programs, but they are the #1 abortion provider in America. They're running a multi-billion-dollar business, and we know it. And they're on every corner. And we as Americans just kind of think, well, I guess that's the way it is. Roll over and play dead. Now, when you think about that, the Holocaust for Germany, they killed about 1,500,000. So we have killed 6 times as many as the Holocaust. The Holocaust that Germany got itself involved in was a murderous kind of machine that you and I would, of course, say should never have happened. When you consider what they were trying to do, it was the final solution for the world to rid it of the Jewish populations. And the supposition for this crime came from atheistic humanism. And why that's such a big deal is because when we look at America, America is to be a God-fearing, God-believing country. We are one nation under God, with liberty and justice, not for all. There are 3,000 Americans a day who don't get the justice they need. They don't have the right to pursue happiness. They don't have the right even to pursue life. And so there we are. And the Supreme Court made this with the abortion legal in 1973 using the same supposition that Nazi Germany used. We will rid ourselves of anybody that isn't important to the future of our life. And so to do that, they had to create a major concept. And I'm going to give you the 6 justifications that you will hear, and these justifications are the justifications that are given for abortion itself. And here they are. These are used by the pro-choice movement to validate their position. The first one is that a child in the womb is not a person. It can't sustain life. By the way, all of these are sleight of hand kind of rhetoric. Well, the truth is that a child, when you begin to think about who a child is and what a child is, we should go to the expert. The expert would be Scripture and what God has to say about it. In Psalm 119:73, it says, "You made me, you created me, and now you give me a sense to follow your commands." So God said, the psalmist said that you made me. In Psalm 39:13, it's even more clear. In 139, let me get there. (139:13) says, "You made all the delicate inner parts of my body, and you knit me together," where? "In my mother's womb." We were knitted together in our mother's womb. In Jeremiah 1:5, Jeremiah says this, "I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb. Before you were born, I set you apart and appointed you as a prophet of the nation." And that's exactly what I was saying to you about God knew in eternity past. Over in the law of Exodus, I think this is very informative for us. In Exodus 21:22, it says, "Now suppose 2 men are fighting, and in the process they accidentally strike a pregnant woman so that she gives birth prematurely. If no further injury results, the man who struck the woman must pay the amount of the compensation the woman's husband demands, and the judges approve. But if there is further injury, the punishment must be matched. Must match the injury. A life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, a burn for a burn, and a wound for a wound, and a bruise for a bruise." People have read that, but they've never read what it's about. It's about the injury to a pregnant woman. When God said eye for eye, tooth for tooth, He was talking about an injury to a woman, to a pregnant woman. So, when a baby, by the way, in the Hippocratic Oath, they swear, a doctor swears when he becomes a doctor, I will not give to a woman an abortive remedy. They swear that coming out of school to get their license to be a legitimate doctor. They have to say that, and yet they will attach themselves to a hospital and convince themselves that it's a blob of tissue or whatever they have convinced themselves of, so that they can continue to do abortions, because abortions make a lot of money. Abortions are an easy procedure. Abortions are not a very dangerous procedure as well, and some folks on my side have perpetrated it as a dangerous surgery. I have to be honest with you, it is now not a dangerous surgery because they get it done, because there are so many that they've done. They're so good at them. Scary. Now what it does do, it does deep psychological damage. If you are a woman and for any reason you lost a child while in the womb, it changes you. You never forget. I remember my brother and I were close together, and then my mom had a miscarriage between me and my two sisters. And if you ask my mom, how many children do you have? She always said 5. 5. These 4 and 1 in heaven. Never forgot it. It meant so much to her. And so just imagine if, at your request, the baby is taken from the womb. The psychological damage is deep. The hurt goes on and on. Matter of fact, many women don't show up for post-abortive kind of care until sometimes 30 and 40 years later. So, at 2 months, a baby has fingerprints. At 3 months, a baby can feel pain. So, is abortion a painful procedure? In the preparation of that, they will tell the woman, no, you will feel no pain. The baby will. The baby will feel much pain. And then at 7 months, a baby dreams and has rapid eye movement. So you see, that's the first justification, is that a child is in the womb is not a child. Well, that is simply a scientific lie. It goes beyond rhetoric. The second reason that they give is a woman has a right over her own body. You know, really the guy that articulated this better than anybody else was Al Gore. At the Democratic Convention, when he was up for election, Al Gore got up and he announced that every woman has a right over her own body and the freedom of choice. And this rhetoric sleight of hand got a standing ovation. You might remember it. I do. I do. But can you imagine the first draft that some young speechwriter brought to Al Gore? The first one said, a woman has the right to kill her baby. No, wait a minute, no, can't say that. So the speechwriter goes back, he writes it over again. A woman has the right to rid herself of the baby while in the womb. No, that doesn't work. That doesn't sound good. It needs to sound friendly and warm. It needs to draw people in. And then that young speechwriter came up with it. A woman has a right of choice over her own body. I can sell that. Women will respond well to that. That makes complete sense. That sounds intellectually correct. Well, by the way, I would just tell you this. A baby isn't an organ in a woman's body. A baby is a separate entity inside a woman's body. If you're a doctor and a woman comes to you, one of the questions you get asked every time is, are you pregnant? Sometimes it's fun to get asked that when you know you're way beyond being pregnant age. But that doctor needs to ask you, are you pregnant? You know why he has to ask you? Because HIPAA, the law of the land, says if you say there's a possibility I'm pregnant, he has to make 2 charts. He has to make one for you and one for the pregnant baby. And yet, the sleight of hand that they use is you have a choice over your own body. But the baby that is growing within you is not an organ. If it were an organ, a baby would be a part of the woman, and the woman would have 4 eyes and 2 noses and a double set of genitals. And that doesn't happen when you get pregnant. See, it doesn't even make sense. The third reason, besides a woman has a right over her body, is a woman has a right over her life. The pro-choice people believe that they have convinced, anyway, they justify death. You know, we love trees, seals, whales, and other than that, not babies. We're into saving everything. If you're driving out in the desert and there's a certain kind of cactus and you cut it down, you'll go to jail. And yet you can have an abortion and there is no punishment whatsoever, because by law you have the right to do that. And the baby in the womb is denied its civil rights from the very start to this day today. And if every American has the right to its own personal civil rights, so do babies. So do babies inside the womb. It is scary to think that the most dangerous place in America for a child to exist is in the womb of a mother. Shame on America. Ladies and gentlemen, we will pay for this. At some point, God will say that's enough, and He will write Ichabod over America. The fourth thing, it's an unwanted child. Bad psychological or sociological settings for the child, and so we can't have that. Or the child is illegitimate, and we don't want that in our families. Or it's going to have no family support, so they think it's somehow a kind thing to do. To not put it in a bad social situation, or to not put it in an unwanted situation or an illegitimate situation. The saddest thing to me is, being over a pregnancy center for years connected to a church and hardly ever seeing any church members darken the doors. Why? Because the shame of illegitimacy, and the only hope you have is that they went to some other pregnancy center and not to the abortion doctor. Now, I just got to tell you, you think it's obvious, but Christians are more soft on this issue than any other issue I can talk to you about. And this is not the issue to go soft on. This is an issue to go to war on. Number 5, if the abortions were illegal, a girl will take it into her own hands, meaning that she'll have an illegal abortion. And of course, we used to have that. I remember when I was in high school, my best friend, having gotten one of our other friends pregnant, took her and had an abortion. And our friendship ended. I was so sick to my stomach that he not only did that and forced her to do that, but that was my friend as well. And there was something so distasteful about that, even when I was in high school. I couldn't manage it in my mind. And now I've figured it out. It is illogical to prevent the possibility of a death of one by instituting the death of another. That makes no sense. That is completely illogical. But why I would get stuck on that being illogical when all five of these reasons are illogical? None of them make any sense. They are rhetoric in its highest form. And it's rhetoric that now is being accepted as truth in America, when it is no more true than the first time it was spoken. Number 6. Number 6 is, what about rape and incest, or the real life threat to the mother? And this was Bill Clinton's big thing. He was the hero of those whose life was in danger. And he was going to save any woman from having an illegal abortion because her life was in danger. Well, here's the truth. Pregnancies created by rape or incest represent 0.06% of all pregnancies. And I would say you can have those. Take away all the others. The category that all the others fall in, if you bear down on it and you're really about the truth, is abortion is something that is done for the convenience of a person. And that's the only reason. The convenience of not being found out that you're pregnant out of wedlock. The convenience of, I don't have time for this child in my life because it's going to interrupt my career. The convenience of, we don't need another child because we can't afford it. The convenience of, I'm not being supported anywhere else. It doesn't matter what the reasons are, it doesn't matter how harsh they are, how troubling they are simply reasons that are for convenience. The thought of caring about the baby first has never been our problem since 1973. Now, so all that being said, why does it continue? Why does it go on? You know, I've written down 5 things, and there could be more, but I think these 5 kind of represent why it continues. Evolutionary humanistic thought. Do you realize how quickly our world is spinning out in what we think is evolutionary enlightenment thought? The idea that that no longer counts. The idea that, the idea that you would stand for marriage only between a man and a woman, that's old. You must be homophobic if you're saying that God never intended for Adam and Steve. That must be a part of your problem. Do you know, in the work that I do, if you're a counselor and you have an LPC or a PhD or you're a psychologist, and someone comes in to your office and they want to have therapy, and if it's a gay couple, you cannot give them the counsel that is wrong or sinful. If you do, the state will take away your license to be a counselor. I remember when you opened the book and you looked at things that you could put down as what's wrong with the person. Like they have things in there for bipolar, they have things in there for depression, they have all kinds of things you put on the receipt so that the insurance will pay for it, and they have all that in there, and they used to have homosexuality. Well, it's been out for about 15 years, and now it's not considered any kind of disorder at all. And as a matter of fact, if you speak against it, you're wrong. You have not made your evolutionary humanistic thought move forward. And so that's kind of part of it. The second problem is it's unseen. It happens behind closed doors. You're not reminded every day that 3,000 babies died today. You're not reminded every day of the reality that it goes on and on and on and doesn't stop, because you can't see it, and because the news is never going to report it. The only thing they're going to report is if somebody does damage to an abortion clinic. That's the only thing that's reported. Other than that, it goes unreported. Nobody's going to talk about Planned Parenthood and how much money they make. Matter of fact, if you catch them in a lie and you put that up there, you are dead wrong. Right? According to the enlightened theory. So it's unseen. The third thing is the political pressure, mostly from Planned Parenthood, because it is a $1.1 billion industry. And Planned Parenthood gives a lot of money for people to go to Congress, for people to be in the Senate, for people to be in the White House. And you're unenlightened if you don't know that. Third thing is it's legal. And I want you to understand, not all laws are moral. Matter of fact, there are laws on the books today that are immoral. None any more dangerous or any worse than this particular law of legalized abortion. And as a citizen, you are not obligated to obey that law. You're not obligated to say positive things about it. Matter of fact, under God, you are obligated to speak against it. Sir Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau were really good friends. And Henry David Thoreau decided, I'm not going to pay the tax on slavery. So he didn't pay the tax, so they threw him in jail. And Sir Waldo Emerson went to get him, and he said, Thoreau, what are you doing in there? You know what he answered back? Not the right question. Question is, how come you're still out there? See, there comes a point when the Christian masses need to stand up and say, no more. This is not right. It's wrong. I'm going to make a political statement. Some of you don't like it when I make political statements. The Democratic Party, for the last 30 years, has decided that they're going to be they call it pro-choice. They're pro-abortion is what they are. And anytime I speak to a Democrat and I look at him, and I don't care how reasonable he is or how good a man he might be to fill that office, I say, your platform of the political party you're in said pro-choice is the law of the land. And you are right, but you are immoral. I cannot vote for you on moral basis. When I began to educate myself about abortion, I've had to vote for some of the screwballest guys I've ever seen. Some pretty recent. But you are given no choice based on biblical morality. And you're going to tell me, well, those biblical morality and politics should never mix. Well, that's the problem. That's the problem. We rolled over and died while the political system took over and has given us a godless system in so many different areas of life without ever taking any heat from the Christian. Time to heat up. So if you're going to be against abortion, you're going to be a political activist. Just that's the way it's going to be. That's the way it is. I didn't pick this fight, but I don't mind being in it. I remember my dad used to say, if you're ever going to be in a fight, you got to make a decision about this before you ever take your first swing. You've got to decide that for a few minutes, you're going to be more crazy than your opponent. And if you're looking at your opponent and you recognize he's more crazy than you, do not fight him. Because what? Crazy always wins. Well, the Christian movement has not had enough crazy in it. You've got to decide, I'm crazy enough to fight against that. I don't care what it means. I'm crazy enough to call out the Democrats on their platform. I realize some of you may walk out and never come back, but I'm that kind of crazy. And it's time for all of us to get that kind of crazy.
Amen. Amen.
And I don't mean this is not a political statement saying you all go vote Republican, but you got to vote for the platform that supports life. We have become a nation of death. And we are people of life.
Amen.
It's bad. The reason it goes on is it's legal, it's not moral. And then the fifth reason, the worst reason, is basically Christian inactivity. We hadn't made a move. We haven't stood up and said, you know, that's enough. Stop. You know, when we were doing the pregnancy center, I had to get an abortion at the Planned Parenthood, you have to have a sonogram. And the sonogram has to be fresh, has to be within a couple of weeks. Because they need to know how far you are along before they do the procedure. And so I went to all the Planned Parenthoods around in our area and I said, we will provide free sonograms for all your clients. And so Planned Parenthoods around our area were sending clients to our pregnancy center to get a sonogram, which is perfect. They said, it had a little card, Planned Parenthood sent me over here to get a sonogram. We can do that. And we give them a sonogram and talk to them about the baby, and we begin to share life with them, share Jesus with them, give them classes, give them support. And, you know, we had at least 90% of them never go back to Planned Parenthood because they heard the truth. By the way, when Planned Parenthood figured out what was going on, customers didn't come back. They we got less and less referrals. But the point is, when you hear the truth, when people hear the truth, they will respond to it. Now, let me just start talking about what to do. Because this is kind of one of those what to do, should we do. The first thing to do is speak out. Don't be afraid of this issue. Become fearless. You know, until you begin to open up, no one's going to know where you stand. You know, when people start talking about, they start talking about pro-choice, a woman has the right to her own body, I get fired up. I want in on that. And you come in and you start making sense, and I trust you understand when you begin to articulate what God wants to do with life. When you begin to get going on that, people understand. I mean, look at this guy, Larry, whatever his name is, that did all that damage to those children when they were just trying to be young athletes. And you know, over in Matthew, Jesus said, you know, it'd be better for you to have a stone around your neck and be thrown into the lake and sink to the bottom of the lake and drown than for you to harm a child. Now, you think Jesus was pro-life? Yeah, pretty much. That's a pro-life statement. And so the first thing we need to do is we need to begin to speak out. And you can speak out in a lot of different places. Matter of fact, if you've got kids or grandkids, and they're in middle school or high school, you ought to be checking their stuff and make sure that they're not bringing home pro-choice material and not able to argue back pro-life. Because, you know, it is the law, but you can stand against that. You can go against that. You can go up against the school board and say there's no place for that. I want you out of that for my child's life. And every one of you ought to be checking. Because there are school districts that teach pro-choice. Like maybe most of them. And educate your children to be pro-life, a pro-life generation. And you know what? You know what's changing in our world? That's why I was always so excited about a pregnancy center, because a pregnancy center takes a girl right where she is and begins to explain it to her. And the most pro-life group in America today are preteens. They get it. They understand it, and they've been educated and been pushed along, and the Christian world has at least begun to step up and begin to talk about this issue. And so we're raising now a whole nother generation, which is the only way to make it go away. You know, there's not a president, there's not a Congress, there's not a Senate, there's not anybody that's going to make this law disappear. Now, one of the things we had to do is get another pro-life judge on there so that no more damage occurs. But the way this law goes away is Americans begin to understand this is an immoral law, it's a bad law, it's not good for America, I'm not going to get myself involved in it. And when the business goes away, the law won't matter. But until the business goes away, we got problems. And you know, people want to do away with Planned Parenthood, and nobody wants to do away with them any more than I do, but I guarantee you, if Planned Parenthood goes away, there's another one coming. Because there is money. There is money in this. So you have to educate the children to be pro-life. Don't vote for candidates that are pro-choice. Period. Support Christian alternatives, other pregnancy centers, other people that are out there on the front line. Help Christian girls know they are loved unconditionally. That's the other thing. If the home wasn't so devalued and people understood the life that they have, and you know, if fathers were being fathers to little girls, they wouldn't go out looking for what it is they find in little boys. And our children wouldn't be having children. The average age of abortion has gone up, as a matter of fact. It's now well into the 20s, where when we first started it was a lot of high school kids, but now high school kids becoming more pro-life. Now what it is it's people in their 20s and in their 30s. And that's where the market sits right now. And then finally, pray. Get up every morning and ask God to forgive America for what we've done this day. a lie doesn't become truth. Wrong doesn't become right, and evil doesn't become good just because it is accepted by the majority. The majority is leading in this, but you're not going to be able to read this. I'll read it to you because, well, I can't read it either. Unless I find it here. Hang on. Nope, we're not reading that. It's amazing. It's from Abraham Lincoln. And basically what it says is we are a God-fearing nation, and we are blessed, and we need to recognize we're blessed, and we need to do what it is God tells us to do without pause. There was a man, matter of fact, there's a great movie called The Zookeeper's Wife, and it's about World War II, and it's about a zoo, and they housed Jews and kept many Jews alive. They provided a safe house, and so it's a true story. But in that story is this man right here. This is Janis Korshak, and when you go to Yad Vashem is the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. You will see this statue, and you can see he's back in the back, and he's got his arms around all these children. And Janis Korshak was a Polish man in Warsaw. He wrote children's books. He was the Dr. Seuss of his time. The most beloved children's books in all of Germany he wrote. Matter of fact, he was Adolf Hitler's favorite author. And he had an orphanage in Warsaw. And in the orphanage, he was teaching children how to write and how to develop a newspaper, and he had all these orphans that he cared for. And Nazi Germany came one day to take all of the orphans, to get rid of them. And they were going straight from the orphanage to the ovens. And Janis Korczak was so upset that he told the children, we're going to go on an outing. And he told them to put on their best uniform. And in the movie, they show little children reaching their arms up, and he's picking each one of them up and putting them on the cattle car. And one after another, and he's having a conversation with this other man. And the SS officers keep telling Janis, you don't need to go. The Führer doesn't want you touched. Even though you are Jewish, you are protected because you are his favorite author. And Janis says, no, I go with the children. And he sang songs with them as they went through the countryside. And when they got where they were going, he carefully loved on the children and explained to them as they walked them over and began to walk them into the ovens. And the officer kept saying, Janis, you don't need to do this. And he himself walked himself into the oven, and from inside the oven, before they closed the door, he said, I refuse to live in a world who has a need to kill children. Close the door. And they all perished. And if you go to that Holocaust Museum, Yad Vashem, you will find that the Spiegel family have put in a special thing just for all the children that were lost. It's moving. You walk in, it's a round area. It's a rotunda, and it has a blue ceiling that goes way up, and there's dim little lights everywhere. And then every second, a little light very brightly shines, and you're attracted to that light. And they say the name of a child that was murdered. And then that light dims, and another one shines. And you stand there, taking it all in. It takes 3 days, 24 hours a day to go through this. What would it take? What would it take for 4 million names to be mentioned. Nobody's gonna cry out. Nobody's gonna say, I refuse to live in a world that cannot keep from killing children. Nobody's gonna do that, except for the Christian.
Amen.
It's ours to do. We need to do it loud and proud. Father, forgive us as a nation, and then forgive us as a people. And God, help us to always, always remember that life is precious. That regardless of what our world says is right, what is right is the truth of your Scripture and nothing else. And God, I know this is a hard issue, Father, for many people, almost an impossible one here, and yet, God, so necessary for us to talk about. So, God, I just pray you would take the wisdom that we have related to this subject, and you would allow us all to become what we need to be in the fight. Father, this is not a time for us to humbly back up. This is a time for us to turn tables over in the temple and begin to really scream out for those who have no advocate, the children of America in the womb of mothers. God, may we be their advocate. May we be all you've called us to be and more in Jesus' name.